Good evening. Welcome to the Henry George School for our special webinar, Environmental, Social, and Governance Concerns in Ukraine Reconstruction. Our speaker tonight on this very timely topic is Dr. Natalia Bishkova, Karl Lowenstein Fellow and Visiting Associate Professor in the Department of Political Science at Amherst College in Massachusetts. Dr. Bishkova is an associate professor of the Department of International Economic Relations at Odessa National Meshnikov University in Ukraine. Prior to her current position at Amherst College, she was a visiting professor at Bologna University in Italy. Dr. Bishkova, the floor is yours. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that earlier on I had a conversation with the presenter. After the slides, we will have about half an hour or maybe more. So we would rather have you hold on to your questions until the presentation is complete. Then we can have time for addressing any questions or any comments that you may have. Natalia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this great introduction. Just first of all, I have to say that's a big honor to stay with us, with you. And before the holidays, I know that you all appreciate your coming holidays time. So I hope this hour you will spend with pleasure. And I would love to share not the insights, but let's say my thoughts about the ESG concerns in Ukraine reconstruction. And of course, this topic is pretty sensible for all of us. And probably in some cases, you will hear my emotions, my personal experience. But anyway, I hope that you really will appreciate my information and my small research. Okay, so let's move on. More than 600 days since the start of the full-scale Russian invasion in 2022, the scale of destruction in Ukraine is tremendous. Millions of internally displaced persons and refugees, hundreds of thousands killed or injured, and many homes in ruins. However, even in these challenging times, it is vital to develop plans for Ukraine's reconstruction so that the recovery can start as soon as possible. Given the scope of Ukraine's recovery, this talk necessarily leaves out a number of other important areas, such as macroeconomic framework for financial stability, or let's say trade policies, or institutional development, etc. But early and detailed coverage of these topics you can find in working papers of other researchers, and I would love to share the list of my references with those of you who are really interested in going deeper into this topic. But today, I will focus on a brief review of ESG concerns that are actively discussed today in Ukraine and may impact the success of Ukraine's recovery in the post-war period. And my suggestions for this hour is to modify the general understanding of ESG from a company perspective into the environmental, social, and governance factors that investors and other stakeholders, of course, measure when analyzing a country's sustainability efforts from a holistic view. So let's go into details. A joint assessment released by the government of Ukraine and leading international institutions in March 2023 estimates the cost of reconstruction and recovery in Ukraine around 411 billions of US dollars. That estimates only covers a one-year period from the start of the invasion to the first anniversary. Continued Russian attacks, including the bombing of Ukraine energy infrastructure and the disaster destruction of the Kakhovka Dam, have driven that figure up further, of course. The longer the war lasts, the more the cost will increase. Let's look at numbers of damage assessments. According to the damage assessment provided by Kyiv School of Economic Initiatives, the Russia will pay, as of September 2023, the total documented direct damage to Ukraine's infrastructure caused by a full-scale Russian invasion has reached around 92 million of square meters, or $151 billion at replacement cost. The ongoing war continues to result in the destruction of residential buildings, educational institutions, and infrastructure, leading to an increase in the overall damage. At the beginning of this autumn, the largest share of damages remains within the housing sector, amounting to $55 billion. In second and third place in terms of damages are the infrastructure and industry sectors. The sphere of education has been significantly affected, around $10 billion in damages in this area just for 1 year. The war in Ukraine, a highly industrialized country, severely threatens the environment and public health. Damaged and destroyed infrastructure significantly pollutes the environment and leaves behind economic and social consequences. Military operations led to significant negative environmental consequences. This includes harms to people through contact with harmful substances, inhalation of gases, soil and water pollution, and destruction of forests. Accordingly to the data, $56 billion estimated damage to the environment caused by the hostilities as of June 2023. The hostilities caused a vast number of fires that destroy property and nature almost every day. War increases greenhouse gas emissions and accelerates climate change. During the first year of the war, 119 million tons of CO2 emissions of greenhouse gases were caused by the war. Moving forward, considering the blowing up of Kakhovka Dam as a particular Russian crime, it should be mentioned that according to a meter project estimates, the total area of buildings and structures affected by flooding amounted to 8 million square meters. Among these, 70% are private houses. So that means that 70% of people who were living there are still staying without their homes. And of course, we have to pay special focus to the agriculture sector because that's a vital sector for Ukrainian economy. And we have to say, and we have to highlight here that impact of Russian invasion of Ukraine is immense. Based on the research estimates as of February 2023, direct damages amount to $8 billion and indirect losses, including lower production of crops and livestock, as well as logistic distributions and higher production costs, amount to an additional $31 billion. To cover the needs for reconstruction and recovery, $29 billion is required. Don't forget that 30% of Ukraine's territory is contaminated with mines. We will need 30 years to demine the territory of Ukraine. Ukraine is the home of 35% of Europe's biodiversity, but leaving behind the biodiversity loss of flora and fauna and harm to the water resources, I'd like to draw your attention to the specific aspects that may matter in green Ukraine recovery from an environmental perspective. First of all, let's talk about energy sector reconstruction. This sector plays a vital role in Ukraine's green recovery because 42% of emissions are produced by the energy sector, which was significantly destroyed. According to the Ukrainian government assessment, around $3 billion is needed in 2023. The key requirement is that Ukraine's recovery should not be a return to the pre-war status, but a full-fledged development, taking into account the European Green Deal, which is also a guarantee of meeting the Copenhagen criteria for the EU accession. At the same time, certain proactive civil society organizations maintain that green restoration of Ukraine needs to empower local self-government, focus on transparency, and involve the public in the decision-making process in terms of reducing, of course, corruption risk. In this order, Ukraine has to adopt anti-corruption laws and seek international support. Another issue is connected with national legislation on environmental impact assessments. To successfully receive compensation from environmental damage, the Ukrainian environmental assessment due to the threats and fines for violation of the law should be replaced by cost recovery environmental assessment of natural resources. To achieve this, there is an urgent need to transpose, or let's say literally transfer, directive of European Commission on environmental liability into Ukrainian legislation. Additionally, it is essential to fully adopt the other EU directives, such as mentioned on the slide. And the third one, also particular researchers have doubts about the greenness of the recovery plan developed by the National Council of Ukraine and publicly presented in 2022 in Lugano. They stress that compared to European recovery in response to COVID-19, plans for Ukrainian green spending are low, and dirty spending, let's say so-called dirty spending, is high. 33% of recovery spending planned by the National Council is likely to have positive benefits to climate mitigation, and 60% is classified as neutral. Meanwhile, 6% of planned investment are likely to worsen climate change, with the most negative consequences from inefficient propping up of fossil fuels. That means that the government should redesign planned, dirty, and neutral policies with consideration of green alternatives. Let's move to the second important point of ESG. Considering social factors from recovery perspective, losses to human capital will also be crucial for determining the post-war recovery. Since February 21st, millions were forced to leave their homes, seeking for asylum abroad or in safer regions of Ukraine. According to the United Nations latest data, November 2023, there are around 5 to 6 million refugees currently living in Europe, including 1.5 million in aggression states and 3.6 million is internally displaced. The war caused and will cause the subsequent adverse long-term effects on productivity and output, arising mainly from two major points: lower education outcomes and skill losses. Talking about educational outcomes, we have to say that lower education outcomes measured by students' test scores appeared mainly due to learning and teaching disruption, ineffective part-time schooling, the destruction of school building, displaced students, teachers, professors, and constant interruptions of teaching process because of air alerts during offline schooling. Yes, our kids are attending school partly offline, and during the air alerts, they have to go to shelter, and this, of course, has a drastic effect to their schooling. And the second point here, as we observe skill losses and reduced working abilities of the working age population. Comprehensive research results suggest that total factor productivity driven by reduced human capital will fall by 6.7% by 2035. Ukraine will likely face a demographic crisis and a significant workforce deficit after the war. Consideration of employers of Ukraine estimates that the labor force might shrink from 17 million people before the war to 11 million after the war. With millions of Ukrainians taking refugee status abroad, the capacity of the economy to grow will be significantly limited. As a result, the estimated employment level gap in 2032 amounts up to 4 million for baseline projection relative to the 7% annual GDP growth target as it was announced by National Recovery Council, depending, of course, on the initial unemployment level. Other consequences are summarized, as you can see on this slide, on the qualitative and quantitative criteria. And if we have time later, we can come back to this slide and I can share my thoughts regarding each of them. But taking all mentioned into account, I'd like to highlight the following special concerns regarding the role of social factors in Ukraine's recovery. First of all, I would like to talk about brain drain. According to the data, around 47% of refugees have a university education level, and 14% of refugees found an occupation in the education field abroad. Me as a perfect example of this. Of course, education in Ukraine has suffered because of the direct damage to the buildings. But what is even more dangerous, it has suffered a lot because of the brain drain of kids, students, teachers leaving the country and potentially not coming back. Many teachers and university professors were able to find jobs abroad. Under other circumstances, this international experience and high qualification foundations obtained by professors and teachers in developed countries during the war may benefit Ukraine's recovery, you should say. But what should motivate educators to return? Those teachers and professors who have at least an intermediate level of English or immediately started learning foreign languages from scratch have fewer reasons to return. And it has a straightforward explanation, in my opinion. The average salary in education and the scientific field in Ukraine is around $300 up to $600. And even if host countries financially reward their return, it doesn't encourage them to return. This calls for strategic modernization in education system. Potentially, I think, mutually beneficial is the international collaboration between Ukrainian school, universities, and foreign partners that tremendously activated after the war and has to be enhanced during the recovery period. But in some cases of collaboration today, we are still suffering from the high level of bureaucracy and unclear nomination process that limit bilateral interplay and initiatives. The second point here that I would like to mention, retraining programs. We all understand that reintegration of veterans, disabled, refugees, and internally displaced people present additional challenge to Ukraine. Apart from subsidized training and education, tax credits to businesses provided from government who are hiring these groups and disability inclusive infrastructure, more accurate approach is needed. There are many government initiatives that were launched with the support of international organizations, and we all appreciate these projects. And in Ukraine, this is super great kind of digital projects foundation. But among others, the grant program exists such a kind of own business for veterans that provides funds and support in business activities. Ukrainian Veteran Fund, together with Ukrainian Catholic University, launched an online well-being course for veterans returning from war, and it's super important for them. Also, Ukrainian Veteran Fund signed a memorandum with American University, Kyiv. According to this cooperation, a set of scholarship programs are available for veterans and members of their families. But right now, these vulnerable groups of people have other needs. These data represent the need for households that return from displacement. But in many cases, these needs are similar to overall people's need in Ukraine. Notably, the most critical need expressed by returnees remains financial assistance, with more than half expressing such a need, according to survey. That's important to mention. There is a higher demand for reconstruction materials among returnees. That means that people have strong desire to rebuild their houses, lives, and achieve a basic standard of living. But people can't think about retraining while they still feel unsafe and do not have satisfied basic living needs. People can't think properly about launching their own businesses or about Ukraine's recovery, facing uncertainty. And the third one, prospect of EU integration. In the face of EU integration, we may expect, of course, it's sorry to say, a new wave of immigration among students and other people in general. Due to the extent liberalization of cross-border movements, Ukrainian students will continue discovering many suitable education opportunities abroad. And we are concerned that the lack of stimulus programs that would increase the retention rate for Ukrainian students will result in high migration numbers. It's worth mentioning here that to motivate students to study at Ukrainian universities instead of moving abroad is to ensure them with the same high quality standards here in Ukraine, with, for example, the help of those educators who were fully integrated into the teaching process abroad during the war and are willing to contribute their expertise at home. Talking about the high school level of Ukraine, it's worth noting that the meaningful efforts to make the European school integration happen were made. The reform of secondary education resulted in implementation of so-called NUSH concept, which used the basic principles of modern education in European countries. But still, some issues appeared due to the lack of technical facilities and well-qualified teachers require more effective solutions. Let's go to the government's factors. So talking about government's factor from country's perspective, I'd like to focus on the distribution of rights and responsibilities among the government and people in terms of investment attractiveness. According to the National Recovery Plan, you can see here on the slide, the key assumptions of the green future are European integration and national security. The latest paramount achievement of the Ukrainian government was obtained in June 2023, when Ukraine has been granted EU candidate status. But formal negotiations would not begin until conditional reforms are carried out. These include, of course, bolstering the rule of law and fighting corruption. And Ukrainian government is fully committed to meeting these requirements. Ukraine has successfully addressed the reform of two key judicial government bodies, the High Council of Justice and the High Qualification Commission of Judges. And moreover, I have to say that according to recent survey, 60% of Ukrainians think that the corruption fight is really going on. In this process, of course, transparency and disclosure due to digitalization are played a meaningful role. And on this slide, you can see just a few successful digital projects supported by the government and highly appreciated in the society. It helps really helps us Ukrainians and foreign partners to understand better what is going on in Ukraine. And recently, Ukrainian parliament removed key obstacle to the start of EU accession negotiation and signed in October 2023 the so-called law about PEPs, politically exposed persons. Of course, it has different long judicial name, but in society we are saying like law about PEPs. The main innovation is that instead of 3 years after taking government office, top government officials will actually have lifetime PEP status and enhanced financial monitoring of money transactions can be applied. Also, essential changes were made in terms of submission of declaration by military personnel. A promising sign for Ukraine's future recovery is the signed agreement with BlackRock Financial Market Advisory on providing support service to the Ukraine Development Fund. The main goal of the fund's creation is to attract private and public capital for implementing large-scale business projects in Ukraine. And knowing the clear commitment of BlackRock to ESG standards, despite the recent statement of Larry Fink, that collaboration brought a new perspective to the table. And it definitely served as a positive signal to all investors around the globe. But at the same time, it's crucial to consider certain pitfalls that may limit some that mentioned positive changes. First of all, minority ownership rights. While policymakers name privatization as the main driving force for making state-owned entities more effective, competitive, greener, we still cannot guarantee the protection of the rights of minority shareholders due to the lack of appropriate legislation. I did my PhD thesis about the corporate-related issues in 2012 and mentioned it as an issue, but things are still there. In 2017, with a view to implementing EU directive about takeover bids, the national lawmaker adopted new legislation enabling a person who had acquired a dominant interest in a joint stock company to require all remaining shareholders to sell them their shares. Since then, squeeze outs, that's the name of this procedure in Ukraine, have become a widespread practice and results in numerous abuses of the minority shareholders' rights, and to some extent discredit the ideas of a takeover bid and squeeze out. Thus, privatization will create a tremendous opportunity for the institutional investors who will be able to buy a significant amount of Ukrainian assets. But at the same time, it limits the investment possibilities for common people. With that, Ukrainian financial market will remain illiquid, inefficient, and just a formal component of the national economy. The second pillar here, anti-corruption reforms. This is a very sensitive topic for every Ukrainian, just believe me. But before going into my concern regarding this, I just want to mention that some countries, before joining the European Union, also had a significant level of corruption and overcame it later. Like a milestone among anti-corruption actions became the law, as I already mentioned, about financial monitoring of politically exposed persons of top A level. The main threat of this law lies in enhanced monitoring of PEP and their close relatives within 12 months after dismissal, which may cause abuse of enhanced financial monitoring by non-bank financial institutions or banks, groundless refusal to make a transaction or even open or continue maintaining an account. Despite the good intention to implement FATF practice in Ukraine reality, it is worth noting that around 53% of the national bank system is controlled by the state through the recently nationalized Private Bank. And this makes PEPs pretty vulnerable. The National Bank of Ukraine is still working on the risk measurement procedure improvement in order to protect PEPs. Meanwhile, many PEPs considered this bill as a punishment for being civil servants. And probably, if we see ineffective, non-transparent law implementation, many good professionals leave state authorities. And the third one, ongoing financial and military support. Since the war started, Ukraine has received unprecedented support from the leading countries, and without this, we would not have resisted and highly appreciated. The Biden administration and the US Congress have directed more than $75 billion of US dollars in assistance to Ukraine, which includes humanitarian, financial, and military support. On November the 3rd, the Department of Defense announced additional security assistance to meet Ukraine's critical security and defense needs. The European Union and member states, in order to support Ukraine itself, have made available close to 89 billion of US dollars, of course, in financial, military, humanitarian, and refugee assistance in general. However, there is still a large gap between political decisions, announcement, and implementation, while people are dying, and military forces urgently need F-16 combat planes. Also, it seems we should worry about the strong democratic backsliding in Poland, Hungary, and Slovakia, as well as the deep rifts between Central and Western European countries. And of course, there is a tremendous concerns regarding the US presidential election in 2024. Anyway, overall, the reconstruction of Ukraine will be a test not only for Ukraine, but also for its partners and international institutions. There is no doubt that it may be challenging because foreign aid could be poorly coordinated or even not materialized. Security issues may be not resolved completely. Policies could take a populist turn. Refugees may not return. But it's also clear that only Ukraine can do its homework and transform itself into a modern country with robust democratic institutions and a dynamic economy. But I want to stress here, the faster Ukraine wins the war, the lower the total damages, and the faster the initial recovery materializes, ensuring green and sustainable growth, not only for Ukraine, but for the whole globe. The determination of the Ukrainian people and Ukraine's partners give us reasons to believe that Ukraine's rebuilding will be a success story. And I believe this short talk will contribute to that success. But I want to end with the recent statement of the US Department of Defense. Security assistance for Ukraine is just a small investment in American national security. Thank you. And I would love to hear your questions and give more detailed answers.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for this brilliant presentation about the state of ESGs in Ukraine. I'm gonna start taking questions now. I see Dr. Mari Roland raising his hand. Mari, are you ready? You may need to unmute.
Let's see. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, good. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Natalia, I thought that was a fantastic presentation, and I'm really looking forward to your involvement in future discussions about this, because I haven't seen anything on this level. But I guess I have to ask why the stressing of foreign investment in the recovery of Ukraine, especially BlackRock, which is notorious in the United States for purchasing single-family homes and keeping people from getting affordable housing. So it looks like they're exporting a bad model. But bigger than that, why you didn't mention the possibility that a Ukrainian central bank could just issue currency and thereby provide the wealth just through its issuance?
Okay. So first, about concerns the reputation of BlackRock, right? Of course, you know much better the idea of collaboration with big institutional investors. But you know, for us, let's say we consider that if a big financial company that provides consultancy service, if they can make a linkage between foreign investors and Ukraine recovery needs, so probably it's kind of way. Maybe we can just start with this collaboration, and later we will find more well-qualified partner in this collaboration programs. But still, at least we need to start from some point. Of course, it's better to mention here that it's quite important to work with IMF, right, or European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, and we are still working with these international institutions. But we really right now in high demand of financial resources. That's why we appreciate any assistance of international foreign investors that can be achieved, at least right now. So regarding your second question about if I understood you right about money emission, right? You're asking me why National Bank just not to print hryvnias, right? National currency. Yeah, but it's you know, in taking into account the basic idea of equilibrium on financial and economy relations. So it wouldn't be possible, and it really will be dangerous. But right now, our biggest achievement in the case of financial modernization is to move to flexible exchange rate, and I hope that it really helps us to stabilize national currency, because right now with the high level of inflation rate in Ukraine, it's really difficult to survive.
Yeah, I appreciate your input, but I think case studies of IMF help throughout the world I don't know if there's any successful outcomes. Looking at post-Soviet Russia, they really took a big hit going to the Washington consensus. But appreciate your input and your answers. So thank you.
Thank you too.
Thank you, Mari. I may also add, if you don't mind, Mari, that given that Ukraine is in an ongoing a difficult situation because of the war, the production capacity really terribly suffered. So in a situation like this, when you don't have production capacity, if you issue money, you end up creating inflation. So probably it would be good to count on donors until you rebuild that capacity, and then you start issuing currency. Then you can expect the domestic production capacity to respond in a way that would help the country recover. Okay, thanks. Appreciate it. Sure. And Yanis, your question or comment?
Yes, I have. Can I continue on your line of thought, Ibrahim? It's not my question. So on the issue of inflation, I would like Natalia to tell us how much the massive monetary help and influx that is coming from the US, what has happened with prices in the Ukraine? Like the money that the US is putting right now in the Ukraine, this first 2 years of the war, how have prices behaved? Has been disinflation in the Ukraine or inflation?
Okay, I had some technical issue with hearing your question, but can I just repeat it? So you're talking about the dangers of putting a lot of money into Ukraine economy from the foreign partners, right? Like financial aids can be dangerous, right, or not?
Yes, but I'm not interested in the future. If that's going to be a danger in the future, I'm interested during the 2 years from 2022 up until now, what has been the effect, the inflationary or deflationary effects of foreign direct
Okay, inflationary or deflationary process during the last year, right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Okay, let's say honestly, I didn't pay a lot of attention to these macroeconomic issues, but from my personal perspective, I can say that our National Bank of Ukraine was trying to keep exchange rate as much as possible, just to help people to have the same purchasing power of national currency. But of course, inflation that we observed last year was really tremendous. So it was really difficult to to compare, to get the same basket of products with the same salaries. And moreover, I will tell you that while as I am working at universities, so many universities was struggling, and they are still struggling with paying salaries and bonuses for professors. So right now, all bonuses are cutting. So that means that inflation pressure is even higher for people who are working in education or in general, right? So that really a big issue for us. But at the same time, let's say this positive movement from fixed rate exchange rate to flexible one should play a vital role in this stabilization. So even right now, we can say that national currency, our hryvnia, hryvnia became stronger than it was even half a year ago. So probably this action really will help to stabilize situation.
Now, Ibrahima, can I move to my main question?
Yes, Yanis.
Yes. Now, Natalia, again, I want to second Martis's laudations to your presentation. I really liked it. And but one hidden assumption is that this is a peaceful scenario. Peace is the main assumption for this reconstruction project. So how you're going to have peace if you don't have a rapprochement and reconciliation with Russia, which currently holds about a quarter of Ukraine's territory? And so my question is, do these numbers assume that this territory will be reintegrated back to Ukraine, or that you're going to try to get it back from Russia? Because that second scenario doesn't seem it's very pragmatically feasible, unfortunately, for Ukraine. So if this scenario assumes a Western affiliation of Ukraine, that creates a danger, like the danger of permanent conflict with Russia, which will undermine any investment incentives for any foreigners to invest in Ukraine if Ukraine doesn't achieve lasting peace with Russia. So I want you to comment on this conundrum.
I would like to ask help in summary of this question, because I had some technical problem just to hear you well. So maybe you can repeat it.
If you want, I can just make it short. I think the audio on Yanis' end is not easy to catch, but I think he said the scenario that you presented, is it based on the assumption that you would have a peace settlement with Russia?
No. This the main idea of National Recovery Plan is to take back our territories.
Okay.
And not only because this is like revenge, or a very ambitious goal just because it is our land. And if we give up, can you imagine what will feel people and families members who died during this fight? That means that's really a big price that we already paid. And of course, I agree with you in some cases that it seems right now that we're all exhausted, we're all tired, and we have so many troubles right now with our military supply and some tensions between our politicians and military forces. Of course, we have this take into account. But at the same time, from my personal perspective, I believe that we need to take back our territories, and probably something will change in the future, but at least we have to try.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Mari, you want to come back? I see you raise your hand again, or was it before?
Well, that was before, but I did think of another one.
Okay.
But I would welcome anybody to intervene and bring up a question. So I noticed that the talk is about environment, social, and governance. And I know Germany is, I believe, regretting the closure of their nuclear plants. So do you see any need to be more green by shutting down the nuclear plants that you have?
That's a great question, by the way, because recently we just discussed the question, what if Ukraine wouldn't have gave our nuclear weapons that we had before they becoming independent country? Probably if we had a nuclear weapon, it would have prevent us from this situation today, but nobody knows would or wouldn't. So, but anyway, I think that if we definitely achieve our goals in this war, so it will be a good sign that without being nuclear country, we can protect themselves and we can resist even if a big evil neighbor is going to attack.
Well, actually, I was talking about the nuclear energy.
Nuclear power, right?
The nuclear power.
Energy.
Yeah, rather than windmills and solar.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you know, sometimes it's considered like the very close topics if you are developing or nuclear energy plants. But let's say in this case, of course, it's much better than to develop gas production, just using the Black Sea resources, as it was mentioned in National Recovery Plan. But let's see, I guess right now it's not easy to say, is it possible to develop in nuclear energy plants in a more greener way?
Okay, thank you.
We have Joe and Ed Dodson. Joe, you want to go first?
Thank you for that terrific presentation. It's a very sad situation, and there's a tremendous amount of sympathy towards Ukraine. There's been a terrible human toll. Could you estimate about how many Ukrainian soldiers have died? How many non-combatant citizens have died in this war?
You know, honestly, I'm not prepared to give you direct numbers, and in some cases, it's even considered as confidential information. But of course, we are receiving the data about our loss. But I can just confirm that our losses are much less than our neighbor has, just because they are not value-owned people and they are trying to use people as a resource. And we are trying to keep our people alive. And this is that makes a huge difference in losses between our countries.
Thank you. And I have to say that it's amazing to me that with the many thousands of Russian soldiers that have been killed and maimed, that the people haven't created an enormous objection to what he's done, which has been a total not only war
I agree
crime, but
with you.
an assault on the Russian people themselves.
Yeah, thank you so much
Thank you, Joe.
for this question.
Ed Durson.
Yes, Natalia, your presentation is very sobering to hear the detailed amount of damage that's been done to your country and what's going to be required to bring it back to any semblance of normalcy is staggering. We in the United States have been fortunate throughout most of history because we've never had to repel an invader. Actually, we've been the invader for most of our history when we've been involved in warfare. But one concern that I would like to bring to you with regard to some of what you talked about in regard to the relations with the United States in the recovery period is that after the Second World War, our nation approved what was called the Marshall Plan. Are you familiar with that term?
Right, of course.
Okay. And one caveat of the Marshall Plan was that the financial aid that we gave to the European countries was to be used to purchase capital goods and technology from the United States. So it did limit, I don't limit what the European countries and even Japan were able to do after the Second World War from that perspective. I don't know if that is a restriction that the United States is putting on Ukraine or not, but perhaps not. And the issue of energy that Marty brought up, I wondered if you've ever heard of the molten salt nuclear reactor technology, which was a technology for creating nuclear energy developed at the Oak Ridge Laboratories in the United States in the 1950s that was quite superior to the nuclear fission reactors that were actually developed and have been used almost ever since. But because they had no military application, the funding from the government went to the alternative type of nuclear energy. So I would just make a note that as you talk to people in the energy area, that they should investigate the adoption of the molten salt reactor technology.
Okay, thanks a lot for this great comment, because really I am not a super well prepared and educated in energy questions. So even if I just, I was trying to put our attention to energy sector reconstruction, but still I feel lack of knowledge in particular technologies that can be applied. But meanwhile, I would like to say that it's crucial not only receiving financial aid from our partners, especially from the United States. We are really appreciate to get knowledge, to get retraining programs, to have ideas, new ideas that can be implemented in Ukraine. So that means, like, the common phrase that it's better to teach a person how to catch a fish instead of just giving a fish. But that's a question that can be considered regarding Ukraine. So we are ready to be taught.
Yeah, earlier Marty Rowland sort of warned against taking the advice of the World Bank and some of the other international institutions that provide financial assistance and economic advice. And so some of us associated with the Henry George School have some investigating experience with these entities, and we're not too sure that their heart is really in the right place. So that's sort of our warning, to the Ukrainian people as you move forward. I wouldn't recommend, for example, bringing aboard the economist Jeffrey Sachs to be in your economic advisory council.
Okay, I will keep this this suggestion in my mind if someone asks me.
And
Thank you so much.
by the way, Jeffrey Sachs, I think he kind of recanted on his old mentors. He's talking a different language these days.
Well, perhaps he's learned something, right, Ibrahima?
They always learn after they leave the jobs. That's the problem. Others can benefit from it. The next question, I see someone raising their hands. Is that Ed? Okay, well, I don't see any other person willing to ask a question, so we're gonna close it here.
Hey, I have a question, Ibrahim. Can I throw a question
Tom.
out?
Fantastic. Yeah,
Yeah,
go
so I great presentation and just every bit of encouragement to the Ukrainian people, so brave and opposing the despot in Moscow. And I did a lot of work in the former Soviet Union in the 1990s. And unlike Jeffrey Sachs, I think I had a positive impact. But more importantly, one of the biggest issues in the former Soviet Union in general, and I know the Ukraine struggle with this, is the immense amount of corruption. And how do you feel the government is doing in terms of rooting out that corruption? And as the sociologist Robert Michel, the iron law of oligarchy, it's very difficult to change these relationships once they get embedded in society. So what are your thoughts in terms of how the Ukraine's doing in rooting out corruption and responding and making, especially since you mentioned about the privatization, that is where a lot of corruption goes off the rails. And I'm just wondering what your feeling is on how they're doing it and if they're succeeding and what the future bodes for that issue.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I know that this is a very painful question and highly debatable topic in Ukraine. But, I would like to tell you just a little story about our fight with corruption. It's not, let's say, I'm not proud of this, but it's just a way how we are fighting corruption on our local levels. So recently, our Ministry of Defense informed society that in that diesel and gasoline that are going to be used for army forces will be added a colorant just to make it green and red and prevent taking this gasoline from the using of army forces. Of course, this is just let's say like a very strange idea how to fight corruption. But let's say if we see the problem, we are trying to use any possible approaches how to prevent it. But what I see in the future, I guess that the powerful role will be to non-governmental organization, NGO, because local communities are very strong right now, and our let's say mentality in Ukraine are completely different from the Soviet Union past, and we are trying to protect our interest, and we are fighting, and we are making pressure for our government. And I hope that you will see in the future how local communities moved by local leaders and people who are interested in getting better future for own children, how they will change the Ukraine recovery plan. But of course, this is a bit difficult to, let's say, connect financial aid partners with the local communities, and the huge work should be done in that. But I guess it should be kind of way how to mitigate this corruption risk.
Thank you. Any other question or comments? Well, it's exactly 7:29. So I guess we're gonna end it here. I'd like to thank Natalia for this very brilliant presentation, and all of you for attending tonight. And we look forward to see you again soon at the Henry George School. Good night.
Yeah, thank you so much for your patience, for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Very good.